deep in the heart of Texas.
We're in the business of winning.
Don't bet against me.
I don't bet anyway.
Don't lose your life.
All right, let's talk a little college football. Mainly Aggies, of course. We'll talk about some other people as well.
Stop making that face at me.
I'm rearing up on it.
Where are my brake pads?
I'm rearing up.
I've seen it pass set a million times.
You know what I would do if I were you? I'd pray to St. Anthony. Please, St. Anthony.
That's exactly
St.
what you
Anthony,
do.
help us. Come around. There's a fucking goatee dipshit talking to me.
But I kind of wanted to tell my story as an Aggie real quick and then maybe give an insider's perspective on the fan base, correct? Some things that have kind of happened recently with past couple of years with the Aggie fan base and whatnot. And the team as well and how we're doing and things of that nature, correct? But I kind of want to let's rewind it, right? Let's go back 10, 15, 20 years, right? A&M was considered a small town, still a small town, relatively. Blue collar, agriculture, engineering, farm boys. And of course that's changed over time, right? But I'm talking about when I was a kid, right? That was sort of the aura of A&M, right? Or that's what they were known for. And they're obviously, look, this video is going to be about how A&M gets a lot of hate, right? I am not an Aggie fan base apologist, okay? I feel like every fan base has like their apologists within the group. I don't like those people. I'm just an Aggie fan base insider, right? I'm just going to give you my point of view. But again, with any good story, we got to go back, right? So that was kind of the aura of A&M, right? Is this, blue jean wearing, that kind of stuff. Kind of, I don't want to say podunk because, look, for all the hate, what I was about to say is for all the hate that A&M gets, A&M's a good university, right? Just anyone who's just being honest with themselves knows that, take the sports aside, haha, you haven't won in a long time in the Big Three, haha, right? Put that aside. A&M is a good school. Like, it just straight up is a good school on paper, in the real world, in terms of results, CEOs, just overall network, right? A&M is a great university, right? In any category you're looking for, right? A&M essentially can check the box. So I want to say that, right? Again, I'm not an Aggie fan base apologist, right? A&M is a good school, and I won't let anyone tell me different. And of course, I'm obviously extremely biased, which we'll talk about in a second. But it's just in terms of any kind of metric, right? Again, take the take the sports of the Big Three outside of it, right? Put that to the side. I know we talk sports here. Put that to the side, right? A&M is just a good university, a good school, right? And anyone being honest with themselves would tell you that, right? And, my dad told me this, and anytime I've told a Longhorn this, they've also agreed. And that is, my family's obviously a lot of Aggies, right? But my dad always said, he's like, my dad, he didn't quite put it like this, but he said, don't get it twisted, right? If for whatever reason the University of Texas comes by and offers you a scholarship and A&M doesn't, you take the scholarship, right? Like, don't ever get it twisted that, it's not like that, right? And anytime I told a Longhorn that, they've 100% agreed too, right? That in terms of you just wanting to go to a good school, if Texas doesn't come knocking and A&M does, you're really not any worse off, right? Again, taking the sports outside of it, right? So there's that, right? Now, me personally, my mom was literally like 8 or 9 months pregnant when she graduated and walked the stage, I believe. I don't know the exact timeline there, but essentially, I've graduated from A&M twice. I've sped run it twice now. And so that's where I want to start with that for a reason, because again, I want to give some insight to the Aggie fan base, right? And we're going to use UT as a comparison here. This is kind of a conversation I've been having on Twitter with a few people, and I find their takes a little weird. And this is what kind of motivated me to make the video, but I want to talk about a bunch of other stuff too. Just A&M in general, kind of the A&M origin story with me, which I don't think I've ever told. So there's that, right? In terms of me, I'm just born into it, right? I don't have a choice. And the way that my college sort of journey happened too, I just kind of ended up at A&M as well, a different branch, right? I ended up at A&M Galveston, and there's really only technically 3 campuses of Texas A&M University, right? And oddly enough, some of you probably know, so there's A&M College Station, the main campus, there's Galveston, and then there's also one in Qatar. Those are actually part of the A&M network, the actual official A&M network, right? So that's also my, like, how I'm also in it as well. And essentially I graduated I graduated right before Manziel came onto the scene, right? Which just absolutely, I'm not gonna lie, that sucked. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm glad he came to A&M and did well, but it sucked that I literally graduated 2 years before he came to A&M, and A&M had, we underperformed largely in football, right? And so then, and I've always hated that. And then, of course, Manziel gets there, and I'm just kind of kicking myself because he came right after I graduated. But that's just a side story, right? So I say that to get to this, kind of back to the Twitter conversations I've been having. If you are an Aggie, right, for the most part, and we're going to talk about, I also want to touch on the differences sort of between pro fan bases and college fan bases. Maybe I should start there, which will kind of tie into what I'm getting to right now. To sort of, there really is no barrier to entry for a pro sports team, correct? You could live anywhere in the country or world, and you could just say, "Oh, that's my favorite guy," or whenever I got into the sport, they were good, and so I always liked that team, and no one would really question you or push back or make it a thing, right? And a lot of people like sports, and so you have to cheer for someone in some kind of way, right? Usually, right? If you had to make a decision, right, and you had to pick, right? Everyone's got like a team or a guy that they follow. So for pro sports, like, that makes sense, right? Talking about the best athletes in the world, what is supposed to be the best version of the game we're watching for whatever respective sport. So like, that kind of makes sense. And this is where I maybe this is me, right? But I've always found it very weird, and it's always irked me a little bit. People who don't really have a tie to the school in any way. Now, this does not count people who have sort of been in the rivalry or part of a school, since they were young and their parents went to that school. That's acceptable. But I've always found it weird, people who just, during high school or in their 20s or 30s became like a fan of a sports team, or they live on the other side of the state or something, but they let's just say, for example, UT is their favorite team, right? Because they're in Texas, which I guess makes sense, but they have like no real tie to the school, right? And I've always found it a little weird, because I understand wanting to watch and enjoy the sport, right? But for people who don't really have a tie to a college, right, which at the end of the day is supposed to be seen as an academic institution in which you went there, you put in the time and the effort and the money, to be blunt, and you are then going out and you are quite literally putting that school on your resume. You are representing that school after you graduate, and while you're there. Again, there's, for me, right, I brought up my story to sort of drive home the point that, like, there are sometimes deep familiar ties within, people going to schools, and they because their parents went there, they went there, and it's a cycle and it continues. There's just something different about, again, having a tie to a university. And again, like I was kind of getting at with my story, you're kind of born into it. It's a loyalty you can't run from, correct? Even if you went to, I don't want to make fun of anybody, right? Let's say you went to some school that's not good at sports. Maybe the one thing they're good at is marine biology. Let's say Galveston, for example, right? Like, I think we've actually had some really decent rowing teams or something like that, or some, forget what it's called. Not like the rowing you would think, like the typical one, but sailing and stuff like that, like more the out. I don't know much about competitive sailing and rowing, right? But the sail team or whatever, like we've had some decent teams there, but that's what I mean is like outside of that, that's just what we're good at, right? And so I don't have a choice but to just be a fan of that school and the university and the system, right? And so I've always found it weird people in this term also came up, t-shirt fans, which is something new. It's kind of just saying another way of bandwagon, right? I just have recently heard it. And it's a good description as well, right? I kind of like t-shirt fan more than bandwagon. There's just something a little softer about saying a t-shirt fan, like you kind of just enjoy it on the weekends or like you have some t-shirts of them versus bandwagon comes off a little more intense, like you are, like you're really into the team, but you just got there yesterday kind of thing, right? So it implies kind of no loyalty or anything. So t-shirt fan, I guess, is okay, and we can go with that. One thing that's always irked me, right, is people who don't really have any tie to a university. And again, that's fine if you have a team. It's fine if you live in El Paso and UT is your team. But it's like the people who get into it, right? The people who tweet all day or are like a hardcore fan of a university or something, and they didn't go there. They're not really from around there. Maybe they liked a player or something, but they continue to kind of be a fan and they're really in it. And it's always been a little weird to me. I think I'm a little different like that. I think most people, they just say, oh, they're just cheering for a sports team. What's the big deal, right? And I get that. But I guess, again, giving you my background and my story, and that is just in general how I see universities or schools, right? Even if you went to University of North Texas, right? Or Tulane, right? Or something like that. I'm just trying to think of smaller schools. It's not a knock or anything like that. I don't mean to be like that. But, you have no choice but to just own it and just be in the trenches, even if you go 0-12, right? It's just the way it is. Like, and so people who, and I'm going to speak more to my local geographic area, right? Look, in my lifetime, UT has been the cooler university, right? They've done better in sports, etc., correct? And therefore, they have a lot more t-shirt fans, quote unquote, right? As it's called. And so I always find it weird when, and this is also kind of becoming a thing lately I've seen on the UT and Aggie and SEC Twitter, is people asking UT fans if they actually went to the school, right? I've seen that happen a lot. And most, not all, but a good percentage of them, I would say over 50%, it seems like, don't really have any ties to the school, right? And again, I'm all for being a t-shirt fan and watching the game and loving sports and wanting just to watch sports. I get that. But when to me, it becomes a little weird when I guess someone like me who's an Aggie or someone who went to UT and someone who didn't go to A&M, right? It can be either way. When they sort of like I don't want to say rub your nose in it, because I'm sure they're not trying to come off like that, so I don't want to put it like that, but it's like they do get a little bit of fulfillment from that school winning. And then when you get into something like the A&M and UT rivalry, then hating A&M becomes a thing, right? It's just part of the rivalry, which is all good and fine, right? You guys should know by now I'm all for the Bants, and my skin is very thick, right? Really, you cannot put your face on camera and have thin skin, right? That I knew that from day one. I knew that if anytime I did this, right, it just is a thing, right? So I want to say that and I've been doing this from day one in terms of A&M, UT, literally my entire life. It's been a thing, right? So it's nothing like that, right? It's just sports, right? No one owns sports, so it's nothing like that from my point of view. But then it's like you don't really have any ties, and it's kind of like someone starts just their thing now is, I'm just going to use me as an example, right? This is not to cry or play victim. I don't want it to come off like that. I'm just using my own example, but I feel like this probably does happen a lot in college sports. And in terms of how I feel, I don't know if a lot of other people feel like that. I think I'm a little bit in the minority on that one, which is fine. But in terms of getting so invested in a college or university that you don't really have any ties to, and then sort of, again, my friend made a good example of how we are as a group, right? And that is, and everyone knows this, right? With your friends or your homies, right? You guys can say the most degenerate stuff to each other, the most slanderous, vile things to each other at times, right? Within the means of whatever you guys know what the boundaries are. But if someone else from an outside group comes in and does that same thing, now our group is now all against you. Do if that makes sense what I'm trying to kind of say here? And so I kind of find it weird with the whole university and schools and people being t-shirt fans of those universities or schools. And again, that's fine if you leave it at that. But the people who like get a like weekend enjoyment out of either, as an example, watching A&M lose or Texas win, that's the part I've always, it's like me getting like really hyped up or down if the New England Patriots win or lose, right? It doesn't make any sense to me, correct? And so I just want to say that. I'm going to say that in terms of my story, my quick story as an Aggie, what kind of prompted me to make this video, and sort of just some of those things I noticed, right? And so this brings me into the next thing that I want to talk about when we kind of talk about where A&M and Texas were when I was growing up, what they were seen as, right? UT has always been seen as the cooler school. That's without a doubt, right? Now, again, I think A&M, what I kind of want to jump into, I think A&M's really closed the gap. We're just gonna have the pre and post Manziel era, right? Which also coincides with us joining the SEC, right? So it really is a perfect landmark or a timeline, a flag in the timeline to go from, right? Pre and post Manziel era, which also encompasses pre and post SEC era for us as well, right? So I watch Josh Pate outkick a lot. He does a lot of good stuff, and so one of the things that's been talked about lately, and we're gonna kind of move in from both my parents went to A&M. That's where they met. My mom essentially walked the stage, graduating with 9 months pregnant with me. I've got countless family members. It seems probably like a quarter or a half of my family members have some kind of either went to A&M or something like that. So, and a lot of other Big 12 and SEC family members in there as well, right? So, but A&M, like we could say A&M is my Batman origin story. I think we could go with that. I like that actually, because one of the reasons I want to make this video, I have tons of reasons, obviously, I keep saying, I don't think there's been any better time to be an Aggie. And I am just like relentlessly hopeful, not on just life lately, but like A&M especially, right? I'm just so optimistic. I just can't wait to see what happens. Like, and this goes back to the 90s Dallas Mavericks mentality that I think I have mentioned before, right? I know nothing. A&M's a little different than the 90s Mavericks. 90s Mavericks were really bad, right? I think ESPN did at the turn of the century, year 2000, they did like their top 10 worst NBA teams of the 90s, and Mavericks were on there twice, I think. So the Mavericks in the 90s were bad. But again, back to the loyalty, right? Back to being born into it by blood. Back to the Batman origin story for my college team, right? All I know is 90s Mavericks, and I'm not going to say disappointing, because A&M's had some flashes in the pan, and Manziel was really cool, and we've won some decent bowl games here and there, right? So it's definitely not that bad. We just have underperformed, right? But again, back to the mentality, it's that, where I was going to get to this, right? With the Mavericks, my all I know is 90s Mavericks. Like, that is where I will always remember where it started for me, and it can only go up from there, right? Like, that's what I mean, where I think I said before I could die tomorrow in terms of my sports dreams, and 2011 will still be good enough for me, correct? Because 2011 was everything. All I know is literally coming out of the gutter from the 90s Mavericks. And so we're getting to 2011 is an entire it's an entire lifetime of a story for me, right? In a way. And so with A&M, right, I feel like I've been going back and forth with a lot of people. I am relentlessly optimistic about A&M going forward. And again, all I know is from my early days is, again, we had some good years here and there, but R.C. Slocum, right? From R.C. Slocum to when he left, and I just remember R.C. Slocum. I don't really remember the teams all that much and stuff. I had some players I remember, Leland McElroy, we had guys, Sir Parker, Jamar Toombs, that era of A&M. I remember, that's about as early as I can remember. And so since R.C. Slocum's left, though, again, pre and post Manziel era, until we get to that time, A&M's just been very disappointing, right? Now, again, that being said, right, I'm going back to what it was back in the day. There was a much bigger gap between UT and A&M when I was a kid. And the pre and post Manziel era is really everything for A&M, right? They got lucky in getting a hot start into the best conference in the nation. Look, I know things have evened out a little bit lately between maybe the middle of the pack of the SEC and everyone else, but look, SEC, even before A&M went to SEC, I always said that at that time, the SEC was just destroying everybody. They were just dominating bowl games, hardly ever losing a bowl game for it felt like stretches there in years where maybe they'd lose in the championship game, or their worst team that got in or snuck in would lose, right? And they were just dominating for 20 years, right? There's just no denying this. And they're still crushing recruiting. They still have the most money, the best resources, the best talent pool locally, minus California, essentially that stretch there of Louisiana, Florida, and Texas. You're looking at half of the main guys you're looking for, right? It feels like I'm exaggerating probably, but just the southern talent pool of players to pull from seems to be much bigger. And again, the resources are limitless, right? So what I have noticed that I want to start with in terms of this transition is that A&M has now become the weird school. And I've always found this interesting because, again, going back to my time, A&M was seen as almost conservative, uptight, a step behind the culture, blue collar, right? They just were seen as completely opposite. And even when I was young, I don't know if this was a phrase before I was born or before my time, but the Keep Austin Weird shirts were a big thing, and that was a big slogan, I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, that kind of thing. And the Keep Austin Weird shirts were a big thing, right? And A&M was seen as the polar opposite of that. A&M was, I think they actually made shirts in kind that said keep A&M normal or something like that, or keep College Station normal. You know what I mean? That's that good banter and good humor back and forth, right? But that's how it was. That's how the culture was seen, right? And I guess it's funny now because I feel like A&M's gotten a little bit of the Russell Wilson treatment here with those videos that came out of the Yell leaders where there was no audio, and I think it was an empty stadium or something like that, and there's one of them in a building somewhere, right? And so this kind of goes back to being in it, and you have to be unapologetic about it. I'm not an Aggie apologist, right? And those videos did not do us any favors. Agreed. Just like the Russell Wilson videos did not do him any favors, correct? But lately, A&M now has become the weird school, right? And I think people, and this is where I'm relentlessly optimistic because look, at people used to never talk about A&M like this, right? Or even get recognized. And again, people might say you're getting recognized for the wrong reasons, and that's partly true probably, but I think also A&M has just been making good noise again, the post Manziel era. And again, I this is kind of, I got into it with this guy today who essentially said like A&M just hasn't been good lately, right? Or since the NIL, they've downtrended. Something of that nature, right? We're talking about the NIL, but this is go to my bigger point, right? When you look at things like the blue chip ratio, just recruiting overall, the revenue and the money that they're spending. Look, the I think whether UT fans want to admit this or not, or just people around the country, uh, look, A&M is not hit yet. They just haven't. They haven't hit yet. I don't know when they're gonna hit, right? But now more than ever, the pieces are on the board for A&M to at least take a stab at something, right? And we've missed on quarterbacks really bad, and that's really sucked. And in my opinion, if we have our healthy quarterback that we go into the season with, we maybe win a couple more games each year, which could be, that's a big difference considering we're winning like 7 or 8 games, right? So we haven't hit quarterbacks. That sucked. But again, the blue chip ratio, the recruiting, the resources. And again, I kind of just go back to this amount of noise I'm seeing. And maybe it's just social media, right? But there seems to be a lot. I don't want to call it Aggie hate because I'm not complaining and I'm not a victim. And I love it. I love all of it. Me and my friend who's a Longhorn, Ian, who does a channel with me, we're always doing kayfabe with A&M and UT, whether in our group chat. Sometimes we do videos, right? But like, we get it's just like fun, right? Like this is not real life. If UT wins a championship or A&M, our lives do not change in any way, any real way whatsoever, right? Unless we put money on it. So I want to start with that, right? But it does seem like A&M seems to be on the tips of people's tongues lately, post Manziel era. And again, we'll say after Manziel actually left too. Just talk about the last 5 years or so, right? And again, that can't be for nothing, right? That can't all just be nothing. And I understand people like to make fun of A&M. I was going back to now A&M's the weird school. And I feel like, again, I know those videos of the Yell leaders are like that, but the way people kind of dogpiled onto that, or the fact that so many people even were being exposed to A&M or whatever, right? It just feels a little different than when I was growing up or just as of late, right? Again, we're talking about my lifetime, and of course I know the internet and social media, right? But I get on social media all the time before this, and no one's talking about A&M, right? In anything. And even with algorithms and stuff like that, it just feels like the last, I know Jimbo and all that, but again, even as something like Jimbo, it's a sign that A&M is at least fishing with some bigger bait. You know what I'm saying? Again, we haven't hit the big one. We haven't caught it yet. But A&M, I kind of keep thinking of A&M as like this loaded spring that's just waiting to be let go if it can just hit the right, hit the right momentum, right? And the right play or the right player. You got to have one or two things bounce your way, right? So that was kind of what just made me, this video is, I feel like the cool thing right now, or again, I know with UT and Oklahoma coming into the SEC, there's a lot of talk about that, but I do feel overall, again, by the standards that people put on A&M, right? It's the standards are now higher for A&M. They're mentioned as a dark horse team here and there, right? And Vegas, by the way, Vegas isn't stupid, right? You can go look at preseason odds, and A&M's almost top 10. I don't want to say every year, but the last like 3 or 4 years, A&M's been in the top 10 in the Vegas odds, right? Which, again, I'm not saying any of this is everything, right? But it is a little different these days. I don't care what anyone says, and I'm a homer and all that stuff, but there's just something a little different, and mainly I go back to NIL, which I was arguing about this guy about, and he was, again, since the NIL, we haven't done good since the NIL, so therefore the NIL must be bad for us, which is, of course, completely incorrect, right? It's not anywhere close to being factually true, because again, you look at the amount of talent A&M has compared to the rest of the country, the last 3 to 5 years or so, right, has been unlike anything we've ever had. And I also, what made me, it's kind of funny, what made me also feel so confident in this, I think A&M also now is more resilient than ever. You look at like what Elko's doing, right? I think we're top 10 in recruiting right now for 2025, which I know we got a long ways to go on that. And he was able to get a great transfer class, bring in guys that he liked, replace guys leaving, right? I feel if the Jimbo era happens 10 years ago, I don't want to say A&M might never recover, but I feel like there's a 3-year period there where essentially we're just waiting for a coach to hopefully build up a new system of guys to make a run at something or to just improve, right? And the fact that I feel like Elko has coached 2 seasons already, right? In terms of what he's doing, the anticipation of what he could possibly do. I think he's a great tactician. Again, he looks like a football coach. I think A&M is the perfect kind of place for that. We'll see what happens, but one thing I will hold Jimbo accountable for is he seemed to just miss on some of the details, and I think wasn't clear in his messaging sometimes. I think Elko is the exact opposite of that. I think Elko might tell you what you want to hear a little too much and a little too direct, which I think is good, right? And so he's recruiting well. And also I want to talk about the A&M baseball run that they had to the College World Series finals, and they were essentially, a hit or another base or 2 away from winning, right? Winning one of the big 3. And look, A&M might be odds-on favorite to win it next year too, which is what made me what has really made me feel good lately about A&M is the baseball recovery. Schlossenagel, I don't know if I'm saying it right. Schloss leaves for Texas, right? It takes the entire staff, and we're just in absolute shambles afterwards, right? And rightfully so. I don't think it was the cleanest exit. I don't think he did it the right way. Again, there's a lot of rumors about what actually went down or what have you. I just overall just don't think it's it's not a good look, right? From the outside looking in, right? He got a lot of flack for what he did, right? So it can't just be us. Whether he did everything by the book or not, the athletic director waiting at a cemetery in Snook, Texas for him, right? Like, if you want to say that's all by the book, that's like dotting your I's and crossing your T's. Look, it's whatever, man. But even if everything was done perfectly by the book, it's just not a good look, right? And I understand that it kind of sucks for us on 2 fronts because he needs to make a move immediately because he's got to start. If he really wants to leave or go, he's got to start day 1 or he's got to start as soon as possible, right? And that sucks for A&M because at that time, I think if you wanted to enter the transfer portal, you had to do so it was like a week after he left, right? Or even maybe less time. And so we were just left in such a bad spot as well, which people will laugh at. And at the time, again, shambles. It sucked. But again, people might also say that hiring early, then we go out and get early, right? Again, Schloss takes the coaching staff, and A&M goes around. They ask a few of the top candidates, right? Some really good guys, offered them big money. I think at the time it was just such a mess, just all around. I'm just not sure that coaches wanted to step into that with a lot of pressure. Again, to say that someone didn't want the job, I don't think is the right way of putting it. I just think there were a lot of doubts about what was going to go on and players entering the transfer portal for the reasons I mentioned a second ago. And because of that, I just don't think they got some of the top guys they wanted. So that being said, while I don't like the early pick, on paper, if I'm on the outside looking in, I love the vibes of the pick, right? A&M said, fuck it. We're just going to go get our guy back who was part of this championship run we just had. We're going to just get him back. He comes back. So 3 of our players were in the top 10 in terms of players in the portal. 2 of them first and second respectively. I think we got those 2 guys and then another guy in the top 10 back. We get a big transfer from Texas Tech, right? And it's like you could not ask for a better recovery, in my opinion, right? You've got to be extremely glad or happy with what happened with Schloss, what it looked like we were going to be stuck in after a championship run, and we have this great team, and guys are entering the transfer portal, and we don't have a coach, and a guy or two turns us down. Like, it was not a good feeling. Now, again, this is baseball, so again, I'm not like the biggest baseball guy in terms of A&M or just really pros in general. Not the biggest baseball guy, right? But definitely kept up with A&M baseball this year. Definitely watched them all throughout the playoffs and whatnot. It's definitely a good team, heavy-hitting lineup. They got an ace. They probably need, another ace or two, maybe, just depending. Better bullpen, which is definitely possible, I think. They got a good reliever or two coming back. So, again, like I said, I think Aggie baseball might be odds-on favorite next year. But why I'm so optimistic, right? In my opinion, going back from how it kind of was to now, right? Is there still a gap between Texas and A&M? Probably, right? Probably, right? I think that's fair to say objectively. But is that gap the same that it was when we left for the SEC post-Manziel era? That gap has shrunk immensely. Immensely. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're just looking at wins and losses on paper, which, again, I acknowledge A&M has underperformed in. It sucks. No one knows better than me, right? But again, if we look at everything else, right? I mean, I know this is going to be silly, but you could look at the baseball team. The basketball team's even halfway decent now, right? I think they were literally ranked in the top 10 for a little bit last year. So the gap, I'm not going to say the gap is non-existent, right? Because in order to close the gap, you have to first prove it. We haven't done that yet. And that's rightfully so, right? Just is what it is. But again, I look at what happened with the baseball team, and we were absolutely floundering there. And do I love the pick of getting early back? I don't necessarily love it, right? I don't think that was like our guy or maybe the best pick. But I think A&M is at a point now, and this is kind of where I think one of those corners has been turned, that we have the resources and we have the money that just getting him back and getting the guys back on that team, I think, again, I love the vibes of getting him back. And even though it might seem petty to say, oh, well, they got one guy out of the coaching staff back, and that may seem like nothing. It may even seem like a loss for A&M. Again, once Schloss leaves, after that, right? Some people might say it's still a loss to get him back. But hearing some of the guys talk and the guys that came back, guys that transferred, recruits we're getting, some commitments we've got to flip to us, some people that have left Texas. I know Texas still recruits well and everything. I just feel like it was a punch to the gut to us, but we punched them right back in a way. And again, UT fans might laugh at this and they'll say you're off your rocker or you're delusional. I don't think it is, right? I just think it's different, right? And again, we have to prove it right first. And you guys and UT's got a really good team this year. They're definitely odds on probably to beat us, unless, we'll see how the season goes. But definitely right now would be favorites over us, I would imagine, by like maybe a touchdown or a little less. That would be my thoughts. But we have to beat them first. But this is not the same. I just don't think the landscape is the same anymore, right? And again, it goes back to just where it was. I think the way people jumped on the Aggies are weird now thing, that seems kind of inorganic from what I know of A&M. Again, the fan base insider, like saying that, it's like on one hand we're like these blue jean wearing farm boys, but then also on the other hand we're these weird quirky guys, right? Like it's just sort of, it just feels kind of all over the place, kind of scatterbrained. And so I get that it's funny to make fun of A&M, right? I get it. Everyone does it. They're the easy guy to kind of kick because they disappoint, right? But that's the difference, right? Had we disappointed 10 years ago, no one would say anything. we disappoint now and everyone notices, right? And again, people might say that's a weird way to look at it, right? That's a delusional, very, very fine silver lining you're looking for, right? But it's the landscape, it's the narratives, right? It does speak to something that A&M has all this talent, all these expectations, and if we don't live up to it, people talk about it. Again, you might think that's weird, but from what I know, that's a small step in the right direction in a weird way, right? I know that's a very weird way to look at it, but it is what it is, right? And again, this goes back to Josh Pate, who said A&M essentially is a top 10. He thinks they're going to be a top 10 program, specifically football, over the next 3 years, right? And one of the guys I was talking with didn't understand it. And it's like, look, man, the blue chip ratio, the money, the recruiting overall, right? It's different. A&M's in the mix, whether you think they suck or not, right? They might be on the outside looking in terms of the mix, but their name is in the shuffle, right? And really, that's why as an A&M fan, every time someone talks about A&M, whether negative or positive, I just think good, right? There's no bad publicity, right? There's no bad publicity. So that's my video. Just want to tell my Aggie story and what I think's going on forward. Trying to think anything else. I think that's probably going to do it. So, yeah, but just real quick, back to the UT and Aggie rivalry, right? I kind of want to retouch on something there. So, again, this is I was kind of, the friend group, right? You and your friends can say anything to each other. That doesn't mean anyone outside your group can say the same, right? And so I've just kind of always thought people who kind of have no tie. Again, university is different than pro sports, and that I feel like I'm in the minority with that. People don't agree, but I guess just with where I'm from, right, where I started, went through, and things of that nature, right? I just don't understand people who didn't do any of that or have no familiar ties, or they just became a fan of a team because they were good at a time, which I hate even more. I feel like the t-shirt fans that are UT fans are just intellectually lazy sports fans. And I said it. They're just the easy pick, right? And again, this kind of goes back to what this paradox they're in. If you want to say that we're a little brother, you're a big brother, you're cool, right? And you've won more, and you might have a better brand or a more nationally recognized brand, and therefore a bigger fan base. You can't then also not admit that you have more t-shirt fans than Aggies do, right? In terms of this specific dichotomy, this relationship that I am a part of, right? You can't have it both ways, right? And so that's kind of one of the things I was trying to tell people or get to them, right? And this is a knock a little bit on A&M, but also a loyalty test. There is, again, we captured the nation for a couple years there with Manziel, right? But after that and outside of that, in terms of just more recent times, there's no real incentive to be an Aggie if you don't have a real, like, a deep, I don't want to say deep connection, but some kind of direct connection, right? There's no reason why a guy in Dallas or Nebraska or California, it just happens to be an Aggie fan, right? It just doesn't happen as much. It could happen, right? He has a coworker who moved out to California, and he always he's teaching him about college football or something, and so he likes the Aggies too. Like, that can happen, right? But for the most part, right, in terms of this comparison of UT and A&M, if you're an Aggie fan, you more than likely have an actual reason, like a closer connection or reason to be an Aggie than the average UT fan. Again, to UT fans who disagree with that, you can't have it both ways. You can't sit here and constantly say how much cooler you are and that you've won more and your brand's bigger and you're bigger nationally, you have a bigger fan base, there's more UT fans even though you have a smaller school. but that also you don't have more t-shirt fans floating out there on your side, right? You can't have it both ways. You just can't. Just logically does not add up. And I'm not saying it's a lot. I'm not saying it's a little. I don't know, but you just can't. You can't. And compared to A&M, you just can't have it both ways in that argument, right? And so that's what I was trying to, I was trying to kind of get under this UT guy's skin because I noticed he didn't go to the school or anything. And so, but it did speak to something I honestly feel, right? And I've always just found, and this is the thing I'm arguing. I'm not saying I'm arguing with this guy on Twitter, wasting my time, right? Or anything like that. But there's a guy on Twitter who is sort of mocking Aggie fans, which is, again, is fine. It's fine. I'm just speaking to the narrative, right? He's mocking Aggie fans, or he's mocking LSU fans, and yeah, Texas is going to come into SEC and just absolutely dominate. And it's just like, who are you? And it's like, oh, I'm just a guy in Ohio who's a UT fan. It's just like, it just comes off, I don't know how to explain it, but it comes off like you're just picking a good team to spiritually fulfill yourself on a Saturday. Does that make sense? Like, it just, a pro team, I get it. There's no barrier to entry on a pro team. But to be so invested in a college team, right? If you want to be a fan, that's fine. But to be so invested, and I'm sitting here like I've been an Aggie since, right? Literally since the day I was born, and it's just like, who are you? You know what I mean? Like, who are you? And then I have friends who actually were UT fans like our whole lives growing up and went there, right? And so it's one of those things where a circle turns around. And they're like, yeah, who are you? You know what I mean? Like, what are you doing here? If you want to come party, that's more than fine, but don't start running the party. You know what I mean? Don't start barking out commands at the party, right? But that's just my opinion on it. A 50-minute video again. So yeah, that's just my little synopsis of A&M, my time there. Also, we will, if you've listened this long, I think we will be doing the football free-for-all again this year. We're going to streamline it, make it a little more watchable. But we'll be doing college and NFL picks coming up as well. So that's it. See you on the next one.